to to fly around the country doing hidden video shops for builders to ensure that they're building their products the correct way, their sales agents are selling the correct way. Pretty much have been in construction in and around it my whole life, as well as, you know, a multitude of other jobs. I think that's kind of how we all end up in real estate. We all have a vast background and nothing ever really satisfied us until we got here. But I have had my license since 2011. I do sell both residential as well as farm and ranch. For me, farm and ranch kind of just came upon me naturally, I guess you could say, because we lived on a farm. So I'm very familiar with, I'm also familiar with floodplain because we happen to have floodplain on our property, with how ag leases work, ag exemptions, you name it. I will say you will learn something every time you do a farm and ranch transaction. It is completely and totally different from residential. Nothing will ever be the same, but I love it because you're always learning something new and it's always super, super interesting. But again, I want to open it up to you guys real quick. I know I had somebody say I want to talk about the listing agreement, and I'll probably do that at the end. This is kind of an overview of farm and ranch, and as well as what a farm and ranch contract looks like. We can do the listing agreement, like I said, at the end. I know somebody said that, and then mineral rights. Is there anything else that you touch on for you today? Please don't be shy. Okay, so what we'll do is the Trello link is in the text chat. Again, for those of you that are just popping in now, when I'm presenting, I can't see the text chat. So if you have a question, please open your mic, shout it out to me. That does not bother me at all. Actually, it helps me because my eyes are not great and I really can't see that text box anyway. But it also helps us to keep from hanging up the screen. If somebody does not have a working mic, if you'll text something in, and then if somebody else in the room is willing to shout out to me anything that somebody types in the text chat, I would be greatly appreciative.
And if you guys can keep your mice off of the screen, please, if you click on that screen, it'll jam Julie up. So just keep your mice off of the screen, please.
Okay, so I'm going to turn around and hopefully everything works. If it doesn't, shout it out to me because again, I can't see my screen. So we're going to start on the Trello board here. Can everybody see my Trello screen? Should be blue. And then what I've done is I've clicked and opened my slideshow presentation. Are we good? Can we see it? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
I can see it.
Yeah, I can. Thank you.
So again, this has got all of my contact information on it. Please feel free at any time. If you have a question about farm and ranch, don't hesitate to call me, email me, text me. That's what I'm here for. So we're just going to kind of jump in and get started. So whoops, except for I can't keep my, there we go. Let's see if that stops. So before we start focusing on the contract, what I like to do is talk about what kind of property you have. If you have vacant acreage, that may not necessarily be a farm and ranch. It might be unimproved lot. So there's a couple things that help us determine whether or not it's a farm and ranch or a vacant lot. Sometimes it might be a residential property with acreage, and sometimes it might just be farm and ranch. And when I say farm and ranch pasture land, I'm meaning like a working ranch, either with cattle or with crops or with hay, something like that with an ag exemption. And what I always like to talk about is what is your client wanting to do with this property? And this is kind of more from the buyer's perspective. Are they wanting to use it as recreational property? Are they trying to add it to an existing tract that they have? Do they want to build a home on it? Are they considering buying like a 20-acre tract and subdividing it for maybe their kids to live on, so everybody has 5 acres? Is it maybe a big, 1,000-acre piece of property that you have somebody that wants to develop? So those are the kinds of questions that you're going to want to discuss with your client before you really dive into it. If you have a buyer that is doing farm and ranch that tells you they want property, you need to determine what type of lender that you need to use for this property. The reason being is with farm and ranch property or any property that has an agricultural exemption to it, those loans do not conform and package into the Fannie Freddie guidelines that can be resold later. The reason being is the title companies cannot give them a resale certificate. Does anybody know what I talk about when I say resale certificate? Yeah. Okay. So when you're buying a property, county, the title company will check with the county for the tax records. As long as it has homestead exemption over 65, all of that disability, that's fine. When it gets to agricultural, that's where you get a little bit of a problem, because ag taxes or ag properties are subject to rollback taxes. So if somebody buys that property and they choose not to continue the ag exemption on it, then they can be subject to 3 years worth of rollback taxes, which are pretty high. So a lender that cannot do a loan without a rollback certificate won't be able to close your client's property. I think we have some feedback. Can you guys hear me okay?
Courtney, can you mute your mic, please?
Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
Cool. So that being said, that is going to go buy 20 acres with an ag exemption and it has a house on it, you need to talk to a residential lender. And the first question that you ask that residential lender is, can you do a piece of property with an ag exemption on it? And they'll go, oh, we can do everything. And you say, no, you go and ask your underwriter if they can do it. Because I've seen it happen too many times. In fact, I got a call from an agent today. They're a week out from closing and suddenly this has become an issue. So again, we can talk more about that offline if you guys need to, but just make sure that if you have a client and they're buying a large tract of land with a house on it, that their lender can actually close that loan. But I strongly suggest if it's just unimproved land or farm and ranch land with or without a house, that you really look into a specialized land lender. Like Capital Farm Credit, Lone Star Ag Credit, those are a couple that are around the Austin area. Capital Farm Credit is really actually everywhere. But your clients are going to get a better rate if you do a local land lender versus like a big bank, because they are more specialized and can do those loans. So some of the things that I always like to talk about when we have clients that have these great, lovely dreams of, we're going to buy this piece of property and we're going to build on it and we're going to have this great house. What cost factors do you need to know about in addition to the land costs? You've got water, well, sewer, septic, electric, how many poles they need, right-of-way easements, land clearing, driveways, all of that kind of stuff is going to factor in. Can your clients afford what they want to do on the land? And some people say, well, that's not my responsibility. Yeah, it kind of is, right? Because how happy are they going to be with you if they just spent $100,000 or $150,000 for a piece of property only to find out 2 years later they can't afford to build what they wanted to on that property? And because they were not educated at the beginning, they're going to be unhappy. Two, they're going to turn around and try to sell that piece of property, and they're going to be in a position of barely breaking even probably. So again, these are things that I say, make sure that you educate yourself on so you can educate your client. The next thing you need to know about land, and again, whether you're listing it or whether you're buying it, what type of restrictions do you need to investigate? Is the property in the ETJ? And so I'll just explain that. The ETJ is called the extraterritorial jurisdiction. And what that means is it's not in the city limits yet, but the city has kind of put their little fingerprint on it saying at some point in time we want this to be inside the city limits. And so they call it part of the extraterritorial jurisdiction. And what that means is they can actually control what happens on that property. So all the city zoning and planning regulations that apply to city limit properties also apply to the ETJ properties. So that can mean for your clients additional permits, additional restrictions put on them, things like that. So you're going to want to know about the ETJ, know about any county restrictions, any deed restrictions. And a good example of that is Farmer Fred has 150 acres and he decides he wants to sell 25 acres of that. Farmer Fred can dictate what happens on that 25 acres. Like he can say, you can't have pigs, you can't have a trailer, you can't have cars and more than 2 cars in public. You can't have an RV unless it's completely enclosed. He can dictate what happens on that property. So again, you're going to want to make sure that Entitled will sometimes find that. However, it's more common than not on farm and ranch properties that the farmer has written them, but not necessarily recorded them at the courthouse. So again, that's something to, whether you're listing a farm and ranch property or helping your client buy, you want to ask about the deed restrictions. And then of course, FEMA. So a lot of our acreage properties are on or near a creek for a reason, right? You need the water for your crops, you need the water for your animals, but that can play a big role in what happens. Any questions before we go to the next slide?
And I would remind everybody to try to keep your mice off of the screen, please.
Okay, so did my next screen pop up, Ron?
Julie, it's Sid. If we could try to put together a list of lender-friendly folks. I've got a couple up here in North Texas, but we could probably just kind of make a list for, which help all of us long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody is different. Like I know one of my favorite lenders here, he can only do things in certain counties and only so many miles east or west of a specific county. So it is good. Yeah.
And that's
I have one in Hunt County.
Okay.
Yeah, that is a good info because we found the same thing up here. They get without about 60 to 90 miles from their home base, they get real nervous.
Yes, yes. So that would be something good. Ron, are we able to host things like lists on our? We can't do them on our YouTube channel, can we? Is there a place that we can host stuff like that? Do you know?
You mean a list?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can do it on Google.
Oh, that's true. Okay.
Yeah, just put it as a Google spreadsheet and then give access to everybody, send out the link, and then everybody that has that link can input into the spreadsheet.
Perfect. Okay, so I will make a note that we need to do that, and then that way we can all add to it, and it'll just be a living, breathing document. Awesome.
And I think, Julie, what screen are you on?
I should be on slide 3. It says, what type of property is this?
Yeah.
Am I good?
Yeah, maybe it's just me, but all I can see is what type of property, and it's huge.
Oh, I wonder if I need to step back out of presenter mode. Let me see.
I mean, if everybody else is fine.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm having a hard
I think
time
it's you,
on
Ron.
the shared screen seeing everything. If she'll, if the resolution to her screen, it probably would reduce it there to fit everybody else's screen.
You know what? That's true, guys, because I'm
You probably
blind.
have a
And
large screen.
I do, because my vision's bad. How is that? Can you see it better now?
Looks
I'm
good
sorry.
from here.
Okay. This is actually in that Trello, so if you want to click on it and follow along with me, you can. Okay. Sorry, I have to have stuff at least at like 18-point font to see it. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, that looks better on the shared link.
Okay, good deal. Okay, so talking about what type of property is it? So trying to determine, are you going to use a residential contract, a vacant land contract, or farm and ranch? So residential
Could you put the link back in the window so that we can on your screen? And
Sure.
big one? Thank you.
Let's see. There we go. How's that? Okay, so for residential, it might be like a little 8 or a 10 acre piece of property that has a house on it. it could be part of a neighborhood with HOA restrictions or not. We're seeing more and more of these pop up. They're like executive style homes on 10 to 20 acre tracts, but then they have these big, huge overreaching HOA restrictions on them. If there is absolutely no ag exemption in place, then you're definitely going to use your residential 1 to 4 contract. If there is an ag exemption in place, again, that's where you want to talk with the lender and make sure that you put it on the correct contract for how they're going to send it through underwriting. And I know that sounds silly to ask the lender, but if you put it on a farm and ranch and they're trying to run it through the Fannie Freddie residential system, it's going to kick it out and vice versa. So it's just always better to ask. And you can always, if they come back to you later, and we've done this before where they needed us to change it to a different contract, we can, and it's no problem. I just always like to, one, have had that conversation with the lender to make sure they can actually do what we're trying to buy, and then two, just ask them how they want us to write it up. On vacant land, it can have an ag exemption on it. It could be as much as 50 acres, 100 acres. There's really not a limit on it. If there are no improvements, meaning like a house or anything, it may have some utility improvements, right? It may have a well, or it may have but it is not a working ranch. And when I say working ranch, again, that means anything that would be livestock related: cows, goats, donkeys, sheep, horses, even though horses don't qualify for ag exemption. Put a big star on that when your client's like, oh, I'm gonna go get a farm, I'm gonna throw horses on it. That doesn't count. And they're not running hay, they're not doing anything like that, then it can go on a vacant land or unimproved lot contract. If we get to the point where we're over 10 acres, we have an ag exemption, whether it has a habitable structure on it or not, but they've got a barn and they've got hay feeders and their cows are out there, you're really going to want to put that on a farm and ranch. And the reason being is the farm and ranch contract takes into consideration any type of leases that may be on that property, because like when I had my property, I didn't want to go into the business of running cattle, right? So Farmer Joe next door ran cattle, and so we just had this little agreement to make the tax assessor happy, right? That he was running cattle on my property. They came over and left their little presents and then went back on their way, but I got the benefit of the ag exemption without having to actually become, a Black Angus rancher type thing. So again, that's why a farm and ranch is going to be important, because whether you have surface leases, mineral leases, air leases, anything like that is going to be spelled out specifically on a contract, and that's when you're going to want to make sure that you use that farm and ranch contract.
And Julie, talk about the importance of an ag exemption. That they always want to keep that ag exemption and save them thousands of dollars.
Absolutely.
So,
So if the property has an ag exemption, and again, this is where we're not supposed to tell our clients what to do, but at the end of the day, if we don't tell our clients what we know, they're not going to know what to do. So if we're buying a piece of property that has an ag exemption on it, and the benefit of that ag exemption, for example, is, let's just say my tract of land was 25 acres and I had a 4,000 square foot house on it. They're going to make homestead exemption on 1 acre in the house. So that's what I pay taxes on, and my tax rate was like $4,500 a year. The other 24 acres are going to have the ag exemption, and my total tax on the other 24 acres was $230. That's a big deal, because if I had to pay the regular tax rate on everything, my tax bill is, $15,000 range. So the ag exemption is critical. Your clients do not want to lose that ag exemption. If they lose that ag exemption, it takes typically 7 years to get it back. Now, every county can vary that a little bit, but in addition,
Up to 7.
well, one needs to check with the key to find out what the restrictions are for to keep that ag exemption, and just fall within that. Sometimes it's as simple as having 3 to 5 goats on there. Other times they have to have more, but each
Right.
county is going to be a little different. Horses are never, because they consider that a hobby nowadays. But
unless you're a breeder.
goats and sheep are what I see around here. I live in the rural areas now, and I see a lot of goats and sheep just for that, just because it's fairly simple, cheap to do.
Right.
rather than him running cows. Yeah.
And so, and with that ag exemption, again, it takes a while to get it. If you lose it, then you're in trouble. But not only that, you're subject to the rollback taxes. So they would roll it back as if it were property without any exemptions on it, and your clients are subject to that. So if they're buying a property with an ag exemption, they need to have a plan before you go under contract of how they're going to keep that ag exemption. Every county is different, and you need to go into every county or know how to look in every county as to what their rules and regulations are. Some counties, it can be a pecan orchard. Some counties, it can be bees, different levels. So like in Williamson County, for example, we have dry crops 1, 2, and 3. We have native pasture, improved pasture, all of that. And each one of them ag exemption rate. So if they change from, and I'm just going to put an example, they just decide they're going to change from goats to bees, and that tax rate's not the same, that's going to be considered a change of use on the property, and your clients need to make sure that they are educated by going in and talking with the ag person at the local appraisal district as to how that will affect them. So again, just make sure that you're familiar with how to find those exemption rates, and they're pretty easy. They're always on the appraisal district site. You have to kind of look at the footer down at the bottom and find them. But I always make friends with the ag reps in the various counties that I work in case I have a question or a problem. I have a person that I just pick up the phone and can call. So that's just a suggestion. If you think you're going to end up in the farm and ranch side of things and you like it, then I would go make a friend.
Excuse me, Julie, this is Jared. I just, so I'm clear, if a person is interested in 10 acres and wants to build a house on there and may take less than an acre, do they lose the exemption, ag exemption?
Yeah, you'll need to check with your county. Every county is a little bit different. Here in the 4 or 5 counties around us, they take 1 acre out and make that the homestead exemption, and the remainder acreage is the ag exemption. And the rule here is you have to have 10 acres for an ag, so which means I would need an 11 acre tract.
And sometimes you need to also check with how much restriction on the septic too. I've ran into that. Some areas will 2 acres minimum for the septic, and then some are 1. But I've also ran into that. Another thing I've ran into is somebody says they want to sell this 40 acres or whatever they have out here. I sold 75 acres out east of Dallas, and I had to get a 911 address so you can put it in. So you can put it in MLS. There's no addresses some of these places. So Julie, you probably come across that. You might speak on that also.
Yeah, there's not going to be an address until the property is sold and the United States Postal Service provides you with one. That's who determines addresses.
You can get one ahead of time. You just call the 911 place. That's why they do it here in Hunt County. I just call the 911 office, and I'll say, assign me an address, and they will go out there and they'll survey it off, and they will give you an address. They'll say, where do you want the entrance to be, and I'll go out there and I'll put a stake or something, and they'll go out there and they'll survey. Well, for right there, that address will be 742 County Road 2287 or whatever it may be. But I do that ahead of time, so you can put an MLS and it can be located in MLS. So as soon as you get a listing, that's one of the things that a hurdle that I've had. But it's pretty easy to remedy if you're good first name basis with the 911 lady. Here in Hunt County, it's real easy. I have no idea about other counties.
Yeah, I know here where I am, it's the post office that does it, but I will check into the 911 because that definitely helps when we're trying to tell people where our properties are. Geolocate
it, everything on, it makes it so much easier. But it takes about 10 days to have it done. So as soon as you find somebody that wants to sell some land, it's one of the first steps that I jump into is to do the 911 addressing. But it's pretty easy done. It's not difficult, and they'll do it for you. But it's the 911 people; they need to know where to locate it.
Definitely. Well, and then to go back to your statement on septics, so that's not actually a county rule; that's a TCEQ rule. And the rule is if there is a public water source available, then you can have a septic on 1 acre. If it's private water source, meaning a well, the minimum is 2 acres for a septic. And that's based off of TCEQ. Any other questions before?
What's that acronym? I'm not familiar with that acronym.
Texas Environmental, Texas, hold on. Google TCEQ,
Texas Commission.
Thank you, of environmental quality or something like that. I think that's what it is. Yeah.
They're real helpful.
Yeah, and so they're the ones that make the septic guidelines for our state.
I usually go to the health department and, they give me those guidelines, but I guess they're following those guidelines from there. So it's easy to go to I think his name's Joe something here in Hunt County. You call him and they'll tell you the restrictions.
Yes, and the local, they do have authority to grant a waiver or an exemption. For example, we had a piece of property that was 1/3 of an acre, so it didn't meet any of the guidelines, but because it had been subdivided and the rule was not in place, we had an exemption waiver, and that is done locally.
And they're probably using an aerobic system.
Yeah, but then what they do is then there's requirements on how much impervious cover. So basically, that lot could only take a manufactured house because a slab built house would not give enough drainage essentially for the drain field, whether it was aerobic or low pressure dose. Okay, we're going to move to the next slide. Any questions before we go on? All right, we should be on slide 4. What does my client want to do with this property? Again, if your client's looking for just recreational use property, they don't care what they do with the land. They may not care about FEMA guidelines. And when I say FEMA, I'm talking floodplain survey, whether or not it's subdividable in the future. They don't care about utilities. Your job is to disclose, and cover your butt. Because it could be a really bad investment for them if you don't, at least explain to them what's going on. I had a property where it had fallen out of contract from a previous buyer. My buyer decided they wanted to go for the contract. The listing agent said, oh yeah, it fell out because it was $30,000 to get electricity to it. I'm like, well, that's crazy. Sure enough, it was $30,000 to get electricity to that property. So again, I don't care what your client's doing with the property, they need to be informed about what they're buying. If they're going to add to an existing property, then a survey with only meets and bounds is acceptable around here. The rule is in our surrounding counties, if it's larger than 10 acres, they do not have to do a true subdivision of the property at the county or local level. They can just cut it off with meets and bounds and sell it. Again, that's different with everywhere, but your clients are not going to want to take it and build on it unless they have a true title survey. If your client wants to build, again, that's kind of where the real work starts for you guys. You need to know as much as you can about how much utility costs and things like that will be. Around our area in Central Texas, kind of a good rule of thumb is 50,000 in terms of a max. It's usually at least 10,000 for the electric, another 10,000 to get the water there, whether it's either through a tap with a city line or a well, 20,000 for septic. Again, that's going to depend on your area, whether it's an aerobic system or an LPD system. And then probably another 10,000 for clearing in the driveway. And so these costs can go up significantly for flag lots. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the flag lot, think of the long skinny pole that the flag stands on, and then the the actual flag at the top. So your flag piece, your driveway may be 1,000 to 1,500 feet coming in, and if your client is insisting that they have public water, if it's available, they're going to pay about $6 a linear foot from the main blacktop road to pipe water in all the way to the house. So by the time they've done that, they've over and above exceeded the cost of a well, and it may not be cost feasible for them. So again, make sure these are costs that you find out. I typically do 2 to 3 weeks option periods when we're buying farm and ranch property so that we can get all of the people that we need to out there to, and they're not going to be able to give you quote unquote estimates. They can give you ranges for what things are going to cost. They can tell you you're going to need 3 utility poles, 4 utility poles. You're going to need a right-of-way easement access to bring electric to your property. Those are all things that your clients want to know because that's going to affect their budget. You know, again, talk to them about their all-in budget. If their all-in budget's like $400,000 and they want to build a $200,000 with the average finish out land price is $120,000, the utility cost might be $45,000. That only leaves like $235,000 to build a 200 square foot house. Can they really truly build everything that they want for $117.50 a square foot? So again, set realistic expectations for your clients, whether they're ready to buy right now or in the future. They want to make sure that they can afford what they want to build. Again, check with local zoning authorities to verify that they can build what they want and where they want on the property. I say that because even though it would be their property, right, and you would think they have the right to do what they wanted to do on their property, we have all these lovely little endangered critters that run around. So, for example, where we are, if you are in the 100-year floodplain, you're automatically in the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone, which is automatically by county law that came into effect 4 years ago, endangered salamander habitat. So if I have a little dry creek, as we call it, running through my property that is dry as a bone, 333 or 363 days out of the year, except for the 2 that it actually, you know, rains enough to put something in there, I can't build a driveway through that little dry creek because it is considered in the floodplain. It's endangered salamander habitat, so I can't do what I want to on my own property. So again, research that for yourself, for your clients, so that you're going to be aware of you know, what hurdles they may have to run up against. If the client is buying a large piece of property, make sure it can be subdivided in the future. Because, you know, people decide, hey, I bought 50 acres, but now I don't want to take care of 50 acres. I'd like to make a little bit of money. I'd like to sell some of it off. Just make sure that at the time of purchase, they can do that in the future. If it's a flag lot, more than likely they will never be able to subdivide it because most counties now have rules that nobody can be landlocked anymore, and easements are no longer valid anymore. Now, ones that were in place before are still in place now, but you can't cut anybody off from blacktop. That's part of the emergency services 911 and all that. So they may have to have 30 feet of blacktop or 60 feet of blacktop. So if that's the case and that's what they're buying now, more than likely they can't subdivide it in the future, and you want them to know. Again, we talked earlier about how to maintain their ag exemption. You're going to want to make sure you have a plan in place. And if that's, you know, Farmer Joe next door who likes to bale hay on my property, you have a little written lease written out, and then when your client goes down January 1 to apply for ag exemption in their name, they're going to have that same lease that has been in place for however many years. Their ag exemption more than likely is not going to be scrutinized, which is something that is super important. If your clients want to subdivide, again, check with your local authorities, city, ETJ, county, etc. To subdivide a piece of property, you will more than likely have to work with your planning and zoning commission. It takes about 3 months or so to complete the process. The cost can be from a couple $100s to tens of thousands of dollars, depending on what the governing entity requires. So again, these are just all things to research for your client. Things that are going to affect whether or not you can subdivide: road frontage, easements, floodplains, endangered species. We kind of touched on all those. And then if you've got, you know, a land developer, let's just say, that wants to develop pretty much everything that you would do with subdivision, but that's also going to entail the change of zoning and rollback taxes. And so that's where you kind of have to work with the local governing entities to see if they're willing to give any type of tax breaks. So lender, again, we kind of talked about that earlier, no ag exemption, and if the house is of equal or greater value to the land, typically you can use a residential lender and 1-to-4 contract. Vacant land with or without an ag exemption, go ahead and I would say check with your land lender. Again, land typically requires 20 to 30% down depending on the lender. And then if an ag exemption exists and there is a property or it's a working ranch, then you definitely want to go with the land lender. Important costs to consider, whether or not public water is available. The water is only provided at the street. And then the standard cost is $5 to $7 a linear foot for the pipe running from the street to the house. So again, it's not a big deal if it's your regular rectangular lot. It might only be, 50 or 100 feet off the road. But if it's a flag lot and you're talking 1,000 feet, then that would be a situation where you want to look into, obviously, a well. Sewer, same thing, follows the same restrictions as water. And then, obviously, if you have to have a septic system, most counties are now trying to push you to an aerobic system, which for those of you who are or not familiar with septic systems, aerobic systems means there's lots of moving parts, right? The traditional septic system is meant to be a closed loop system and can work until the end of time. However, our lovely local health department officials want to tell you they have a lifespan of 35 years. Not true, but anyway, an aerobic system means you have typically anywhere from 2 to 4 tanks and 1 to 2 separate pumps that actually work and do things. Basically what that means to your client is they're more expensive to put in. They have more moving parts that break on about an every 4-year basis. And so the cost of maintaining an aerobic system is going to be higher. A regular traditional low pressure dose system is you go to the bathroom, flush the potty just like you would in a house that has sewer, and you don't really think much about it until it's time to pump it out about every 7 to 10 years, or depending on your use. So if the county says you have to use an aerobic system, you can say, well, I want an engineer to review it, and you can try to push back and go get a regular low pressure dose system. It definitely saves you money. You just know that you can push back on that. Electric, again, how is it going to be brought to the property? As we all know, we have right-of-ways in the road to bring utilities. However, you may have a big piece of property like maybe 2,000 or 3,000 acres next to you. And so to bring it all the way down in front of their property is pretty expensive. And so the utility companies don't want to do that. They want you to go get a right-of-way through the neighbor's property so that they can come the shortcut way. If that's the case, then typically your neighbor is going to want you to pay for that easement through your property. So again, something else to research during the option period to find out how are you going to get electric to the property. Land clearing, same thing, get estimates, driveway. Obviously your costs are greatly affected if you've got a big flag lot and you've got a long driveway. Otherwise, it's not that big of a deal. But the difference between a 50-foot driveway, say your clients have to have a paved driveway. 50 foot of driveway versus 1,800 feet of driveway, obviously are going to be very, very different. And then I would say, all this information ties straight into if you're listing a farm and ranch property. If you have a farm and ranch property that's a flag lot that they put a concrete driveway from the main road all the way to the house, your property's worth a lot more than one that's just, 50 feet off the road, 25 feet off the road, because your clients have put more improvements into their property. So when you're pricing and things like that, it's real important to, it's hard on farm and ranch to assign apples to apples or to really find one comp that's equal to another comp. Just know that as you're pricing your properties, you're going to have to make adjustments based off of the size and shape of your lot and the types of improvements that you have. If your clients are going to plan on building now or any time in the next year or so, I would strongly recommend that in addition to meeting with the land lender, they go ahead and talk with a construction lender. The big thing is if they're going to have 20% down for land and then turn around and have to have 20 or 30% cash down for construction, is that even within their budget? There are lenders out there, especially land lenders, that you go and you get the land loan first. You're going to build, then they'll use the land as the collateral or the cash out of pocket down payment for the construction loan, and then they'll lump it all into one. So again, just more information for you to know, be aware of, and have on hand for your clients so you can make sure that they can get exactly what they want this property for. Restrictions, occasionally, like I said, you'll have HOA restrictions on farm and ranch property. More than likely, you're going to have deed restrictions, and they're often placed by the farmer who is selling the property. And just so you know, just because you don't like the restrictions does not mean you can remove them. The only person that can remove those deed restrictions placed by a previous owner is that person or his heirs or assigns. So I had a call today on one where there was basically a right-of-way easement or an ingress-egress easement going through, and the buyer was into that in the title documents. It's like, well, sorry, they have to use it to get to their flag lot property in the back. That's never going to go away. So you either accept it, you buy the property, or you don't, because that easement's not going away. County, if it's outside the city limits or ETJ, there are still county restrictions that apply. That can be whether it's the amount of acreage you can subdivide to, the amount of road frontage you need, et cetera. Just, I always say know your contacts both with the city and the county, and you'll be good. And then FEMA. FEMA is a really, 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 really big one because everybody wants that beautiful piece of property on the river. What you need to know is that those floodplains can be changed every 8 years. FEMA comes through and revises them out, or they look at the maps every 8 years, if not sooner, due to some type of disaster or flood. But you may have a piece of property now that you buy that's not in the floodplain, and 4 years your property is in the floodplain. So make sure you are familiar and understand a little bit about FEMA. So long story short, farm and ranch is its own unique animal with lots of intricate and moving parts. No two pieces are alike. So if you feel like you're in over your head, I strongly suggest that you partner up with someone who is very familiar with farm and ranch and learn from them. I've had people say, I don't want to learn, just, let me refer it. And that's okay too. But if you are wanting to learn, but also want to make sure that that you're representing your client the best, then I would strongly suggest partnering with a farm and ranch agent. Any questions? I know I've just spewed a lot of information at you.
And I would second that. If you're having any questions about doing a farm and ranch deal, please get somebody that's experienced with that.
Absolutely. Okay, so now I'm going to switch over to the actual farm and ranch contract, and we'll run through that real quick. Might be really, really big on my screen. Let me see if I can reduce it. How does that look for y'all? Can you see it? Okay. So whether you're a listing agent or whether you're a buyer's agent, you're going to see a farm and ranch contract. So I just want to make sure that we point out the differences in a farm and ranch contract. Some of it will look very similar to a residential, and some of it won't look similar at all. So obviously the parties of the contract are the same. Your legal description, again, it's not uncommon to have the property potentially in 2 separate counties. So again, you're going to want to go, and please don't use Realist, y'all. I know it's such a nice little tool, but remember it's a compilation of a lot of different information to the appraisal district and pull that information. That's super important because Realist can be wrong. Tax records typically are not wrong, although I caught a big mistake, big boo-boo yesterday. But again, so if it has multiple legal descriptions, you're going to put that in there. Obviously, if it doesn't fit, you're going to put see special provisions for full legal description and stick it in down there. As we talked about before, you may or may not have a physical address. If you have available in your area to get the 911 to establish an address, you will, although for title purposes, it may not be valid per se because it's not been assigned by the U.S. Postal Service. But again, that's an option for you there in the address portion. Everything else is pretty similar until we get down to section C on accessories. So farm and ranch has things that other properties don't have, right? They have portable buildings, hunting blinds, feeders, troughs, irrigation equipment, all that. Again, on the listing side, this is where you find out from your client before you ever list it, what are they taking? what are they leaving, what's negotiable. So if there's anything specific that they're taking with them, like maybe they're taking the irrigation equipment, then you're going to make sure that you let everybody know that is not available in the sale. Do not put anything in this line that would go on a non-realty. Please do not put refrigerator. Now, you will put tractor, mule, not mule as in farm animal mule, mule as in like a gator, like a four-wheeler type thing. Livestock do not go on a farm and ranch contract ever. They go on a bill of sale. So again, these are only things that are either attached to the property or farm implements that go along with the property, not the actual animals. Exclusions, again, anything that may specifically be excluded. The next big thing that farm and ranch contract is under paragraph. Yes, sir.
Julie, so you say you can put tractors and stuff like that? I thought those would be non-realty items. I didn't know that you could put the hay baler and the tractor and all that kind of stuff, because it would be financed with a lender. You wouldn't want to do that, would you? I never do. I'd separate them out.
Well, it depends, because an ag lender is going to be familiar with financing farm equipment anyway. And so unless they want to do a separate bill of sale and pay cash for it, or unless the lender comes back, like if you're asking for obviously $100,000 worth of farm equipment, you're probably going to affect your appraisal. But if it's, you know, the zero-turn Z-Force mower out here that would have a, you know, Craigslist value of $2,000 or $3,000, but you know they paid 10 or 15 for it, then you're going to want to do that. So any farm implements like that I put on here.
That's good to know. I did not know that.
Yeah, and again, that's a conversation for your lender. The things that can't go on here, right, are living, breathing farm animals. But yeah, but you can fit that on your farm and ranch contract. So on the sales price, again, this is where things look a little bit different, right? We have our cash portion and our loan amount. And then you'll go down and see under D. The sales price will or will not be adjusted based on the survey required in paragraph 6C. If the sales price is adjusted, the sales price will be calculated on the basis of blank. So this comes into play. Let's say this piece of land has been in somebody's family for 100 years, right? They think they have 100 acres, but nobody has seen a survey since the beginning of time. So obviously a new survey is going to be needed. Well, let's just say the survey comes back and he doesn't actually have 100 acres. He has 85 acres. In farm and ranch world, we don't pay for your error. So we would assign a value per acre, and then we would adjust the sales price based off of that. Does that make sense? So on here, if that happened, you're going to fill in the price per acre that would be adjusted, and then they're going to have to do that with written notice. And again, typically 3 to 5 days is a healthy range. You pick a specific number of days, and then you also determine how that adjustment is going to be made. Is it going to be made to the cash portion, or is it going to be made to the finance portion, or choice C, where proportionately to both? But again, that's something that's going to catch your eye on the farm and ranch contract.
Hey, Julie. We
Yes,
had
sir?
a comment that they asked you to address the meets and bounds legal versus existing fence lines versus adjudicated boundaries. Let's see, so the class can understand the difference when they get a survey.
Okay, so farm and ranch life typically goes back to an old survey somewhere from the 1800s that says with meets and bounds means it's physically describing the tract, right? So it's going to start over here where this rock is, and then it's going to go this many degrees this way to that old tree over there, and then it's going to, okay, so that's great, but that doesn't work in 2017. That's how it worked, you know, back in the olden day. So meets and bounds is not a survey for loan purposes. If somebody's paying cash for it, they can accept that all day long. The way I work in farming ranch, I believe the seller should pay for the survey. And the reason why is the seller has to prove what he has to sell. So an appropriate survey for farm and ranch is going to look just like an appropriate survey for residential. It is going to have all of the iron rods, meaning those little pins that they have put in the ground. They're going to go out with their metal detector, find them, flag them. That's going to be your point of beginning, and then your origin points all the way along. So they are going to go take those old field notes and they're going to go stake out that lot. Then in addition, they're going to go back and they're going to go to the courthouse and they're going to research and say, how far back, how many surveys has this property had on it? Has there been any discrepancy? Oh, okay, well, at one point in time, this tract was 100 acres and now it's 50 acres and then it became 20 acres. So they've got to go back and research all of that. And if there was something that was on this 20 acres that was originally there on when it was 100, it has to follow the line. Fences never follow property lines. If your fence encroaches on your neighbor, guess what? You don't own your fence. Your neighbor owns your fence. So adjust your fence lines. But a lot of times, you'll put like a fence up around the house, but maybe not around the creek because the cows are going to cross the creek, whatever. But on a true survey, you want to see any electrical easements, because you may have, it's not uncommon to have your property literally bisected with power lines, which means, yes, that's your property, but you can't put anything underneath those power lines for, depending on what the easement says, for 10 or 15 feet on either side of that pole. So while you own the land, you can't do what you want to in that area of the land. You're going to want floodplain delineated if you have floodplain on it. You're going to want the house if there's a house. You're going to want the well if there's a well, septic tank. All of that you want to physically be able to see on that survey. Otherwise, it's either a plat or it's meets and bounds, and it will not pass through underwriting if your client's getting a loan on it. Does that make sense? Any other questions about that part of the survey?
Marie, do you want to ask your question? Marie asked, why, if there is an existing survey already in place for a farm and ranch? I'm not sure exactly what that means. Do you want to?
It would all depend on how old the survey is and how extensive the survey is. Just like if you were doing residential, you can't turn in the developer's plat map as a survey for the buyer because that's never going to pass through financing. Same thing as on farm and ranch.
And Sid was saying if they're over 10 years, most won't accept.
Well, and like I said, and it's not uncommon for farm and ranch to trade hands with cash. But again, I would never purchase anything that the seller could not prove to me they had to sell. Like, I can read field notes all day long, but field notes never tell you, I say never, typically never tell you how many acres it is. It just goes through rambling on from the point of beginning, this many degrees, minutes, seconds, for this many feet along this line. So you really want it to be truly calculated. Another thing that you'll run into, and I've had this happen, is suddenly there's going to be a discrepancy in the property line, or there's going to be a discrepancy in the acreage. You need to know when the last original survey was done and when those iron rods were set versus now. For example, we had a piece of property that had been surveyed multiple times over and over, starting back in like the 1940s all the way to last year. During that time, obviously, we've come a long way with GPS and everything else. So the old survey was done off of a completely different system. And when plugging it into their GPS, we were like 30 feet off on our property boundary lines. So, and each surveyor was like digging their heels in, oh, I'm right, no, I'm right. And I was like, guys, let's just work together. what system are you using? What system are you using? Because I'm reading their field notes and their minutes, degrees, seconds are not lining up. And I was like, well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that somebody's wrong or you're talking a different language. Once we got everybody to play nice, we found out one surveyor was using this system and the new surveyor was using this system. And it was simply a matter of putting the calculations into the conversion table from the 1940 system to the 2000 system. And then suddenly we magically all got along. So that can happen too. So just be aware of that if you're dealing with a really old, I say an old piece of property. In other words, a large tract that hadn't been subdivided or resurveyed in a long time, you may run into that, some discrepancies. And that's typically what it is, that they're using different systems. Okay, so Earnest Money and Title Company, one thing I always say is pick a title company in the area where the property is. I know I have my favorite title company in town and they're great and all, but they can't go and necessarily do the best job on a rural property 3 counties away. And it's because they're not there, they're not familiar with things. An agent last year was having a problem getting a title commitment because apparently there was a gas pipeline going through the middle of the property. I helped her with it. We went and got a title company in that particular area because it was a couple counties away. And they're like, oh, no, we know all about that. That pipeline's not even there anymore. It's been removed. They issued a title commitment within 1 day, and we've been working for almost 4 weeks with another title company. So again, that just really helps things move along if you actually use a title company that's familiar with the property. Survey, we talked about survey. Again, on the part where you're going to say whether or not on the standard printed exceptions under 6A, C, if you do not understand that paragraph, please get with your local title rep and ask them to explain that to you, because your clients certainly don't know. So you're going to want to make sure that you understand that section and understand the desires of your clients. Again, down on the survey, if you're going with a current survey, pick however many days that you want to put in there. Existing survey. Now here's something different too that's different with farm and ranch than a regular survey. Let's say you have a survey that's 10 years old and nothing has changed on that property at all. You can go back to that survey company and ask them to recertify it. And it's typically done for probably 20 to 30% of what a new survey would cost. And a recertified survey, I've never ever had title or a lender not accept a recertified survey, because basically all that does is saying everything that we did back then is absolutely correct today. We take the old survey and we put today's date on it because we have certified it's true, genuine, and accurate, and that will save your client some money.
Yeah, it helps with the survey company still in business. They're out of business. You're out of luck. Been there, done that.
But a lot of times I find that they've sold their records to somebody else. So it just depends. Like I know around here, so-and-so may have died because he was doing surveys till he was 90, but he sold his records to another company. So sometimes you can find it. Otherwise, obviously, you'd have to go back and start again, but it doesn't hurt to check.
Julie, this is Rebecca. Is there a difference in surveyors? Do we need to make sure we find someone who specializes in farm and ranch surveying?
Yes. Yeah, you do. I mean, it's just like appraisers and just like agents, right? You have different levels of agents and different different levels, but you have agent or salesperson or broker, right? Same kind of thing, but a residential person all day long, they may have learned this in school, but may not have used it for however long. So I would make sure that you are with a land surveying company. That being said, that also means that you may go from a 7 to 10 day turnaround to like a 21 to 28 day turnaround, but that's the farm and ranch world. It takes that long. And I've seen this happen, and it sounds pretty silly. I represented the buyer, and the seller was supposed to be getting the survey done, and the agent called and said, well, the surveyor couldn't get it done because they went out on the property and there were snakes. I'm like, yeah, he needs to wear his boots and carry his 410. That's, again, so you're going to want somebody that's not going to, run away. They need to actually be familiar with the job. And your title companies, especially if you use a local title company, they're going to tell you who their land surveyors are. And again, I always order my surveys through the title company because they're going to get a better deal than I can get on my own. Because they order so many, they're going to get a discount.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Again, just be familiar with surveys on farm and ranch. It's not uncommon for them to take 3 to 4 weeks. So typically farm and ranch tracts do not close within 30 days, whereas residential, of course, they'll close in 30 days. Farm and ranch are a little bit more difficult. I say difficult, they just take a little bit more moving parts. Objections, again, like if we were doing residential, we would put residential use. If there's a house there or you want to put a house there, you might put residential and agricultural use. If you know it's a really large tract and the developer's buying it, although typically it's not going to go on a farm and ranch, it would go more on a commercial deal, but you know, you might even put, you know, possible developmental use, depending on what your client's trying to do with the property. For me, I think objections, 5 days is kind of excessive. 3 days is more in the range, but again, you know, you choose 3 to 5 days, however many days you want. So the biggest part of a farm and ranch contract for me is down here on letter E, exception documents. Any leases that are in place are going to be excluded from the title commitment. So you as the listing agent better know what leases your seller has on that property, and as the buyer's agent, it is your responsibility to dig and uncover and ask what leases are in place. That can be anything from grazing lease, hunting lease, fishing lease, etc. And then exception documents could be anything from mineral rights, crop rights, water rights, air rights. And I'll give you, for instance, we had a piece of property that had a cell phone tower on it. So we asked for the documents. Well, we found out that the owner sold the rights to the cell phone lease because he was supposed to get, like, I don't know, something silly like $1,000 a year for the next 15 years. But he wanted it all in a lump sum. So he sold that lease to another company for a upfront lump sum. So he took a payout of like $5,000. He needed the cash. So now the new lease that came in place wasn't for 15 years, it was for 30 years. And in that new lease, they wrote that they could take that cell tower and move it anywhere they wanted to on that 30 acres, and the owner of the property couldn't say anything about it. And that they also had a right-of-way easement, a perpetual right-of-way easement, which meant they could move where they put their gate anywhere on that property. So long story short, that greatly affected the value of the property for my client, and it cost the seller about $150,000 because my client was not going to get any profit off that cell tower lease, and then, or the fact that they had the big ugly cell tower in their backyard, plus the fact that the lease no longer went for 15 years, it now went for 30 years. So those are things that you're going to want to make sure you understand and you get. And that's typically when you bring in a real estate lawyer to make sure they look at all of that and explain that to your client, because that's obviously not our job, but we need to know where to dig and find that. Any questions on exception documents or surface leases?
You just said we need to know where to dig to find that. Where do we dig to find that information?
A lot of times they are filed in the county courthouse. Does everybody know how to pull deed records at your courthouse? If not, learn. Some deed records are online. Some you actually have to go to the county clerk's office, but you need to know how to pull a deed record, because that way you can see what's happened with that property. Just a quick, for example, yesterday I was going on a listing appointment. I'm pulling up all the tax records, and right before I get there, I realized she doesn't own the property anymore. Her ex-husband owns it. No, I have the house. It was given to me. Well, long story short, they had two pieces of property that were divided. The appraisal district put the deed of sale on the wrong piece of property. It was still recorded correctly in the courthouse, but not at the appraisal district. So it's going to take some unraveling. But basically, if you go down and get familiar with the county clerk, They will show you how to pull deed records, learn how to pull them online, so that way you can search for grantee, grantor, and actually see the deeds. That's also going to be important when you are dealing with, old surveys and meets and bounds, because all of those are on file at the county courthouse. Any major mineral, like all mineral rights are on file, air rights, anything where right-of-way easements, anything that there has been that affects that particular tract of land by law is required to be recorded. Now, does that mean that everything's recorded? No, because Farmer Joe may have put something in his safe box at the house, but title is going to dig it up, but you also want to learn how to look that up as well. Any other questions on surface leases or exception documents? Okay, so page 3 of the contract is pretty similar. The only question that you will not see on a regular contract is under number 7, where it says Texas Agricultural Development District. Just put no, we do not have any ag development districts in the state of Texas, and we haven't had any for like the last 10 years. So you're pretty safe just putting no there. Obviously, notice is only going to apply if there's actually a structure on the property. You're going to choose buyer accepts the property as is, or if it's currently under construction or in the middle of rehab or whatever, then obviously you check number 2 and put what needs to have happen. Residential service contracts, you can get them for farm and ranch properties, but they are a lot more. So check with your home warranty company. There's only 2 home warranty companies in Central Texas that actually cover wells or septics. Most other companies don't. So if you're not used to dealing with a home warranty company that does cover those rural items, you need to find one that will. So a typical home warranty for a farm and ranch property that would cover the house as well as well and septic will typically run you between $650 and $700. So be familiar with that. The government programs, again, ask your listing agent or if the loan officer knows if there are any government programs, and that usually refers more to like a working crop farm, but there's not many of those around. Closing, typically at least 45 days to close in farm and ranch. It can be shorter, obviously, if it's a cash deal, but a lot of that time, honestly, is just you waiting for a survey to come in if you need a survey. Everything else is pretty standard. Closing costs, if you want closing costs, add those in. The biggest section that, again, you're going to want to bring your client's attention to is on the rollback. If a new owner chooses to no longer use the current ag exemption, they need to be well aware that they're going to be in a rollback tax situation. And everything else is pretty much standard until we get down to our option period. Again, if it's a completed construction on farm and ranch, 10 days, because you're going to need extra time to inspect your well and your septic. If it is raw land, then I usually do 14, sometimes 21 days, depending on where the property is and who all I need to get out there. If I need to get water, if I need to get septic, well, you name it, all those people, electric out there to give me price ranges. So again, that's kind of standard there. Any questions at all on the farm and ranch contract? I know we went through it pretty quick.
Yeah, I have a question. What was the term you used when it takes a little longer on the option period? You picked 21 days. You said something.
Yeah, like if it is raw land or vacant land that does not have any improvements or utilities on it, and my client is going to have to bring water, sewer, whether that's in the form of septic, water, whether that's in the form of city water or well, all that kind of stuff, we want to know those costs. So I typically do anywhere from a 14 to 21 day option period. And then we call all of those companies and have them come and meet us on the property. We mark off about approximately where we would want to have the house so that we know how many feet we're going to have to pay for, all that kind of stuff. And I mean, it depends on where you are in the state. Like if you're in the eastern side of the state where you've got good soil and you can hit water at 200 or 300 feet down, your well costs are going to be very different than if you're like over in the hill country where you may have to go 800 or 1,000 feet down to get water. That's going to really affect your prices. And so if your clients are going to want to build on that property, you're going to want to find all that out during your option period.
Thank you. And if for whatever reason it's over the budget of what the buyer had intended, then he can opt out from the contract?
Absolutely. That's, again, why you want your option period to be long, because
Okay.
it's protecting your earnest money. So, yeah. I mean, and we, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and we had that happen where it was literally a 20-acre tract of land 5 miles outside the city limits, and it was truly $30,000 to bring electric to the property, and that was before we even got started on water and septic. So that blew 2/3 of the utility budget. And so we went back and honestly renegotiated the price, because the price of the land was $120,000 and it was $30,000 to bring electric to it. So again, having those costs gives you ammo. Not that you're trying to twist somebody's arm and lower the price of the property, but when those utility costs are exacerbated for whatever reason, that property is really not worth what they may think it is, right? To bring all those extra, to bring all the utilities to it. So that just helps you in negotiating for your clients.
I have another question. I'm not originally from Texas, but have you had any experience that either farm or ranch land has had any issues with environmental, like do they have any remediation costs, anything like that?
So yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon that people used to go out and bury their trash on their property. The guy that we in fact bought our old farm from, it wasn't until we had sold it and I became his agent to sell another tract, and he's like, oh yeah, I see that pile over there. Oh, that's where we buried some old tractors and stuff like that. And I'm going, oh my gosh, because yeah, like if they buried, if they have underground like diesel tanks, like if it's a big farm and they're kind of far away, they'll have underground storage diesel tanks, things like that. Those can definitely leach, and there is an environmental TAR form that you're going to want to attach to that. So yeah, from that perspective, definitely environmental in terms of like your well water. There's parts here that are high in sulfur content. I just ran into this recently, a couple counties away. There's actually water in that area that's radioactive because it's a big granite outcropping, and that off gases or that puts off radioactive isotopes in the water. So there's all kinds of things, and it varies from area to area. Looks like somebody asked about earnest money. I typically still just 1%, kind of standard for our central Texas area. Any other questions about anything you may run into? I know we've talked more about the buyer side, and we can talk some about the listing side, but I want to make sure I get all of your questions out of the way before we switch gears.
Did you answer the question about the cost of surveys for farm and ranch? How they're, quite a bit more than residential?
And honestly, it's going to vary. So what I would suggest you do is call around and get a couple quotes yourself, and then let the title company order it for you, because they're going to get a discount on top of that. But typically around here, a 20-acre survey will cost you anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000. A lot of it depends on the shape of your property, the amount of easements on your property. My property was a little bit different. It was like a horseshoe shape, or like a U shape, and the horseshoe part of it was a creek, so it was surrounded by creek on 3 sides. So that was a lot more intensive, because they actually had to wade into the middle of the creek and find the iron rod that was buried under the water to kind of draw those, and then they actually had to do some what we call lines of sight points because they were down in a creek bed. They couldn't shoot up to the next iron rod. So that gets a little bit more intensive. If it's snake infested and they got to go through a lot of stuff like that, your price is going to go up. But yeah, I mean, so like for regular residential, that might be, you know, $400 or $500, whereas farm and ranch, you kind of don't sneeze at them for less than like $1,500 or $2,000. Any other questions? Make sure that you keep that Trello link. It should be available to you guys after class in case you have any questions. I don't know if you're familiar with the Trello board, but it's kind of a nice little way to do a collaboration. So you're able to go in and make notes and things like that. Again, feel free to call me if you have any questions at all on specific things to do with farm and ranch. I'm going to hang out here for a little bit because I know we have some people who have some questions about on the listing side, so we'll make sure that we go over that. But let me see, what is this? Would you recommend a new survey? So in terms of a new survey or recertified, basically it's gonna, if you have the old survey and everything that you physically see on the property is on that old survey, a recertified survey, because they're not gonna recertify a survey if anything is different, meaning they added onto the house or anything like that. But as long as nothing has changed, then they will recertify it, and that is just as fine as a brand new survey. Any other question, guys? All right, well, you guys have been a pleasure. I feel like I've just talked to you or at you, but again, feel free to call me or text me if you need anything at all. Okay, wait, if recreational, get money for rollbacks. Yeah, and I wouldn't buy an ag property that's we're going to use for recreational. That's just my personal preference on that. But if your clients, but again, it's not up to the seller to pay for your clients wanting to change their use. So not sure how that will fly, but good luck with that. Thanks, guys. For those of you that want some listing stuff, you'll just hang back and then we will talk about that. Put the Trello thing back in here. There, that way everybody will have it.
Thank you.